one of the chairs of the Family Economic Mobility Workgroup, and just wanted to just share a little context for folks. We haven't met in a while. There's been a lot of transition between some of the leadership of the work groups in 2Gen. I think many of you, I believe I saw Manisha Srivastana on the call. But as many of you know, Manisha and I chaired the benefits cliff group for a while. Manisha kind of left her leadership role in that space. Earlier in the year, Betty Weintraub was working on transportation issues with Shanae. Betty retired, and we kind of combined our benefits cliff work group and our transportation group and workforce group into one working group called Family Economic Mobility, still looking at some of those very same issues around workforce, transportation, benefit cliffs, and public benefits and social services. I also left my role at the town of East Hartford, and I'm now working at the Partnership for Strong Communities, focusing primarily on housing as the director of coalition and advocacy there at the partnership. So hoping that earlier in 2025, we can start to talk a little bit more about housing. And then finally, Shanae has transitioned from her role as parent leader to really applying more of her professional experience as a leader in economic development. And so she and I have been kind of working together on the family economic mobility piece, of course, led by Christina. And if any of you have not seen the documentary Fighting for Home, you can see Shanae in her, I guess that's a great example of both your professional and parent leadership in that. So since our last meeting, we did present on the option for a benefit cliff pilot to the Asset Funders Network. That was a really exciting time looking to get more support behind the pilot. You will hear more about pilots throughout the meeting. We decided that these work group meetings would Christina has really been leading the preparation and management of the feasibility of two pilot studies. Again, you'll hear more about those. And there's been extensive outreach, for use of the Cliff dashboard tool, which we were hoping to have a little bit more of an update for you on from actual users. And I'm not sure that worked out for today, but I'm sure you'll get an update there because that's really rolled out in a way where folks are actually using it, and that's really exciting. So that's kind of where we're at. Happy to be sort of resetting and, to Christina's point, re-engaging everyone in this work, especially as we look forward to a legislative session starting, where I think hopefully we'll make some more progress, but also as we get to a point about these studies and pilots that are going to be rolling out. So I want to introduce Grace from the Office of Workforce Strategies. I know her team has been kind of leading this transportation work, so we're really grateful for that. And she's got a nice presentation to share with all of us on how that's been going. So Grace, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with you all this morning. Before I launch into, the transportation study, I wanted to give you all a little bit of background on the Office of Workforce Strategy. I just wanted to see if we were going to call up my slides. So,
Grace. Yeah.
I know many of you already know the Office of Workforce Strategy, but for those of you who don't, I know Kelly Valerie is our Chief Workforce Officer, has presented many times on these calls, but I wanted to give you a brief overview of who we are and what we do. So we are an independent agency. We're fairly new. We were codified in 2020 to focus solely on workforce development. So our team serves as the staff for the State Workforce Board, which is known as the Governor's Workforce Council. And we are the primary advisor to the governor and to the state on workforce development strategy, programs, and policy. Like most states in the union, I'm sorry, if we could just go back one slide, sorry. Um, uh, Workforce development in the state is highly dispersed. So workforce development is not owned by one entity, one public agency. So one of our main tasks is working across our many organizations that are responsible for workforce development. That includes our sister agencies, community-based organizations, businesses, training and education organizations, and make sure that we're aligning workforce development activities across the state, raising best practices, ensuring that there's no duplication of services, meeting business needs, and also the needs of residents throughout the state. So if we could please go to the next slide. All of our work really centers around our mission, which is to ensure that all individuals, regardless of background, have a seamless and supported pathway from education and training to a good job, and that every business has the skilled talent they need to innovate and thrive. If we move to the next slide, please. So
Sorry.
to fulfill our mission, we are very focused on building a demand-driven system. That means that we're really focused on understanding what are the jobs, where are the jobs, and that we're responsive to business skill needs. But equally important is our focus on equity and ensuring that we're embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of our efforts. If we look at the job market right now, we have a very low unemployment rate. So as a result, we have more open jobs than we have skilled job seekers to fill them. And our labor participation rate, which hovers around 64%, that's on par with states around the union. However, if you look at the labor participation rates for specific populations, that labor participation rate is much lower. So if we could go to the next slide, when we think about how are we providing businesses with the talent they need to compete, it's really imperative that we're focused on expanding the existing labor pool. And that means that we need to provide education and training, as well as targeted support services to individuals who are not fully engaged in the labor market. And we're focusing on those populations that are historically marginalized and underserved, which includes BIPOC populations, people with disabilities, women, veterans, reentry individuals, youth, and particularly opportunity youth. We're also focused on immigrants and refugees as well. If we go to the next slide, we know that supports are critical to participation in work. So many individuals, as this group well knows, are facing barriers to participation in education and training and employment that are not of their own making. So we are focused on working with our sister agencies and when many of you to help individuals overcome those barriers, whether those barriers include childcare, benefit cliffs, which you'll hear about later today, housing, and of course, transportation. So if we could go to the next slide and the next slide. So that brings me into our transportation research project and the work that we're doing there, which has really been fascinating. Transportation, as you all know, it's the economic backbone of our country. It's how goods and services move. But also, really importantly, it's how do people access essential services and how do they get to their jobs and how do they be able to retain their jobs? We live in a society that has a presumption that everybody can get where they need to go. We're a high mobility society. If you need to get to the doctor, you go to the doctor. You need to get your kids to school. You need to get your kids to childcare. You need to get to work. You're going to be able to do that. But as we know, for many families, the reality is affordable and reliable transportation is out of reach. So if you're somebody who doesn't have easy access to a car or public transportation, you are putting together a patchwork of transportation options in order to be able to access things that many of us take for granted every day. And that really limits people's economic mobility. In Connecticut, in particular, public transportation, while we've got buses and trains, particularly in urban areas, we have we have transportation that only really covers a small portion of the state. And because public transportation is limited, that also limits people's opportunities to participate in jobs. So they can only access the jobs that they are able to get to. And it doesn't only affect people who are job seekers or those who are employed, but it also affects the businesses themselves because they have a smaller candidate pool from which to choose talent. So I do want to recognize that the state is working on a number of ways to improve public transportation. But regardless of what happens with public transportation, it's really incumbent upon us to come up with innovative solutions to help to ease the transportation burden for many families. So if we go to the next slide, I'll dive in a little bit more into the research that project that we're doing. So, with the context for transportation, knowing that it's a barrier to economic well-being, and really behind our desire to come up with innovative solutions to transportation, there's a number of innovative things going around the state, and we're trying to find alternative solutions to what currently exists. We've been working OWS in collaboration with, I have to say, an amazing working group of people that includes the 2Gen Advisory Board, the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Labor. We launched this work in late August, and everybody has really had their nose to the grindstone in moving this work forward. We've also been very fortunate to be working with a fantastic research and data firm called RSG. We have Tristan Cherry on the phone with us today, on the Zoom call with us today. RSG, he's leading this group of people, has been really terrific. RSG has, they're a research and data firm, and they have expertise in a number of different public policy areas. I saw Tristan just, his actually video popped up, including transportation. So they're bringing their insight and knowledge to this work, and we're very grateful. Our group really does know where we're going with this work, but we have a working goal that we are continuing to tweak. And that goal is to improve economic mobility for low-income individuals and families by substantially increasing access to safe, reliable, and affordable transportation options for employment opportunities and childcare and wraparound programs, because we are thinking about families and individuals. So it's really important for us that any solutions that we come up with are financially sound, that they are innovative, and of course, most importantly, really speak and respond to the varying needs. And we really have heard varying needs across the state, depending upon the region and also upon the individuals that we've been speaking to. Our project has a number of different steps that we can kind of like put into three general buckets. We've completed some of them, and we've got a ways to go on some of them as well. So one thing that we have done is we've completed a big data landscape analysis, and that's telling us more about the transportation services across the state. Where do we have transportation, and where do we have gaps? We've also completed one round of stakeholder engagement to better understand the challenges and needs on the ground and to help us inform solutions. We will have another round of stakeholder engagement, which anybody on this Zoom is welcome to be part of. We would love to have your perspective included in our work. Ultimately, at the end of our research project, we're going to come up with 2 to 3 pilot solutions that we're going to share broadly across the state. So I'm going to dive now into the landscape analysis. If we could go to the next slide. So RSG, again, Tristan on the call, has helped us really understand where the transportation needs exist in the state from a data perspective. So they've developed for us a landscape analysis tool, and that helps us understand who's traveling, where are they going, why are they going there, and how they are getting there. So the way this tool works is it uses location-based services data, which is data that's collected from your cell phone. So if you're like me and you watch a lot of crime dramas, you know that your cell phone is tracking your location all the time. And what data scientists do is they've collected all of this data, which is billions and billions of points of data, and they've made this gigantic data set. And that data set can tell us about trips that are happening anywhere across the country, in a city, in a region. And what's really amazing about this data is that it can help us understand or make predictions about where people live, where they work, what their income is, and even how they travel. Are they taking a car? Do they own a car? Are they traveling by train? Are they walking? Are they riding a bike? So what Tristan and his team has done is they've taken that data that they procured from a company called Replica, and they have built us a series of dashboards. And that dashboard, well, it's really a virtual tool. And we can use that tool to help us understand where transportation needs are. And from there, be able to come up with solutions that help the greatest number of people. And I think we're still trying to figure that out too, or really hone in on where the greatest need exists as we develop these pilot solutions. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just give you an example of the landscape analysis. So this slide shows a census block level concentration of work locations in the service industry that are within half a mile of a transit stop. So if you look at this, you can see where transit accessible job opportunities are located in the state. So it doesn't have to be service industry only, it could be manufacturing, a number of different industry sectors. And then from there, we can understand who's going to these jobs and how they are getting there. And so you can imagine that when we look at this across the state, we can see different regions of the state where high concentrations of people live, where high concentrations of low income people live, where they are traveling to work, and how they're getting there. And that's going to really help highlight the gaps and help us understand where we need to deploy the very best solutions. So that's our landscape analysis, and that's been completed. So we also have done, as I mentioned earlier, one round of stakeholder engagement of the two phases that we're having. And in this first phase, our amazing team of people put together a really big list of stakeholders. And that stakeholder list was designed to give us a wide array of perspectives so that we could understand the challenges of transportation very broadly and also potential solutions. We heard from a host of different people who gave us a multi-layered perspective of the transportation needs throughout the state. And those people included potential program beneficiaries who could use the services of a pilot once something like that potentially launches. We talked to members of the Connecticut General Assembly. I think I saw Representative Nuccio on the call, and we're thankful to her for giving us so generously of her time. And we were lucky enough to get a real cross-section of representatives and senators to give us their perspective. We also talked to program managers from community-based organizations who are experts in transportation or advocates for transportation. And through the Department of Labor, we talked to JAFIS case managers as well. We talked to Jobs First Employment Services managers who work with people who are challenged by transportation, and we got their perspective as well. So if we go to the next slide, when we combined the landscape analysis along with the information that we got from stakeholders, we came up with a long list of challenges that people face, and I've kind of put them into three buckets here. The first is, and we've touched upon this first, is public transportation is um, it doesn't reach all areas of the state. So it's fractured, it can be unreliable in certain instances, and this becomes a challenge even in urban areas, but specifically in rural areas as well as suburban areas. So that makes it a challenge for people to get to work. The second challenge we saw is just generally high transportation costs that make transportation prohibitively high. And this includes rideshare services, but it also includes car and car ownership and everything that goes along with that. So licenses, registration, insurance, repair costs, everything that hinders owning a car or and having that flexibility to be able to get to where you need to go. Now, these challenges are compounded depending upon who you are. So, if you're a family with children and you've got to drop your child off at daycare or to another childcare setting, you are essentially doing two commutes every morning and then two commutes every evening to get your child back and forth. And that um, is a huge investment of time. It can be very unreliable. We know that families often are having to take expensive ride shares when transportation is not available. And then there are individuals who have disabilities or seniors or the elderly who also face compounded transportation challenges. Medical transport services, ADA services, they can also be insufficient, often unreliable. And so that makes it harder for those populations to be able to get to jobs and essential services. So if you go to the next slide, um, we have come up with a laundry list of solutions. Some of those are long-term. I'm not going to go over those today. Those are not going to be part of our pilot solutions. We are going to share them broadly, but those long-term solutions take a long time to implement and will take a longer time to reap the benefits of. Short-term solutions are the ones that we want to implement with our pilot to help really fill the gaps that people are experiencing right now. So the kinds of short-term solutions that we're thinking about are low-cost personal vehicles. So really thinking about car ownership, car repair, a range of different car variations within that bucket. We're thinking about rideshare as well. We are also considering micro transit services, especially ones that connect disconnected public transportation services. And then finally, we have a bucket of community-based services and thinking about how do we work with employers and community-based organizations to come up with innovative ways to provide workers with opportunities to get to and from their jobs. So we're going to dive much more into these. We're going to take that laundry list and if we go to the next step, in phase two of stakeholder engagement, we are going to be getting feedback from our stakeholders on a set of potential pilot solutions before we then narrow it down to 2 to 3 that we're going to share more broadly. We now have the opportunity actually to use all the brain power on this call here to do a sort of an impromptu stakeholder engagement sessions. We're going to go into some breakout groups now, and I'm going to pass it to Christina, I believe, to launch us into breakout sessions.
Yes, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to copy and paste the questions in the chat. Amy, Sarah, Shanae, and hopefully I can get myself into room one. If I can't, Grace, you're currently assigned to room one. Would you be okay asking the questions in that
Sure.
particular space if I can't get in there for some reason?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Wonderful.
I
All
hope I
right.
have the questions
I am going to
in the
put
chat.
them in the chat for
Okay.
all of us so that we don't have to figure out our lives around that. Give me 1 second to do that. I
And
will copy and
Tristan, can you
paste.
jump in and just explain what a microtransit service is while Christina is, I'll kill it if I try to explain it. So do you want to just say 2 seconds on what microtransit is?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where these have been implemented, but in general, I think it refers to smaller transit vehicles that are often summoned, either via an app or a technology, and they deliver door-to-door transportation in areas with less dense transportation networks. So outside suburban areas, exurban areas, and rural areas.
And for the questions, I assume that we want to know folks here personally and also the people you work with, right? It's both you, but it's also the people you work with.
All right, I am ready to open all rooms. The questions are in the chat. Again, Grace, if I can't get into room one, if you would be so kind to help me out there. Amy, Shanae, and Sarah. Is everybody, I think everybody's entering. Am I right in saying that everybody is entering? It
Yes,
looks like it.
I am.
If you click on join, then you'll be able to get into the breakout sessions. How do I? How do I go around to each room?
Avenue. And I noticed that I see a lot of people standing at the bus station stop across this on the street from my house. So they are using public transportation to get somewhere. I mean, it is used right where I live quite often
in Bloomfield.
in Bluefield.
What is the busing? Is it really frequent in Bloomfield? Because I'm not really familiar with
I don't know. It's not
you see it
super,
often,
it's not
yeah.
super frequent, but more than you would think.
Okay.
You know, Bloomfield it's an interesting town. It's really, I love living in this community. It's very diverse. So
Also here, we're in New England, so the weather is also a factor, especially when you have a child who's in a wheelchair. The waiting times sometimes aren't that on time, even though you have the transit app and they're saying that the bus is approaching and the bus is not approaching. And I guess really the accessibility, when I would live closer to Main Street, it was easier to get a bus. But when you're off that route, it's a little more difficult. And the farther out, the farther in between are the routes, and sometimes and 1 hour is one route, the other hour is an alternate route. But I think it's that, and I understand that has to also with the population. You know, they're going to base their routes on the population of the area and the usage.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's when I move
of years, so for holiday seasons where retailers are open later, there's not a lot of consideration for workers who get out at 11 o'clock or later.
I live in the northeast corner. There is no such thing as public transportation up here. I struggle with that for my residents in Willington, especially. And even in Tolland, there's one stop in Tolland, and it basically goes either to Yukon or to Hartford.
On that. Christina, you're here. Christina, we're kind of jumping right into solutioning.
Listen, whatever's going to help us with the transportation feasibility study. Yeah, I'm totally game for whatever you want to do.
Okay. Although people are welcome to answer any of the 3 questions that have
Yeah,
been
absolutely. Yeah. I think that was the case in some of the other breakout sessions too, or some folks were identifying what are some of the problems, especially with families with disabilities, and the lack of consistent transportation, and the frequency of public transportation. So those were some of the concerns in some of the other spaces. I don't want to stop you from what you are doing, and I don't want to take away from the light of others who are contributing here.
Mike, you came off mute. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, so I would just add, in terms of solutions, I've been a big supporter of the vehicle repair program idea, just because when I think about our Jobs First participants, a lot of them have access to a car, but they don't have that, $500 or $1,000 or $1,500 they need to repair that car in order to make it drivable and usable every day. And I like that option because it's among the less expensive options. I think it has the opportunity to impact the greatest number of clients. And lastly, just in terms of impact, I think it gives the client, the parent, the greatest amount of flexibility when they have their own vehicle and they're not reliant on public transportation or some of these other alternatives. And I would also just add, in the JAFIS program, Uber has been sort of a blessing and a curse at the same time. It's been a godsend for a lot of our clients. I'm thinking of a client last week who was living in Waterbury and Ubering to a job in Prospect. And she was working 7 days a week, 8 hours a day. So she was working 56 hours a week. She had 3 children, and she was making $25 an hour for the first 40 hours, and then she was making $37 an hour for the hours between 40 and 56. So she was like on target to make somewhere around $74,000 a year if she worked 7 days a week at the pace that she is right now. And so we've been paying for her Uber back and forth from Waterbury to Prospect to and from work every single day, which is great. In one breath, I'm happy to cover that cost so that she can keep working. On the other hand, it's like at some point we want to help her transition to another vehicle or some other option because the Uber option was just becoming so expensive. I want to say it was like 700 and something dollars a month or something, which gets pricey, when you've got 5,000 clients on your caseload that you have to worry about. So it's been a huge help for us, and I'm glad we added that to our kind of our repertoire of solutions. But it can be very expensive too if the person has a long commute to work and they need it in both directions.
Yeah, I think I'll chime in here really quickly. I see Christina said we have a minute left. I think with the personal car buying options, and there are programs like the Nutmeg Working Wheels program that offer car buying opportunities for individuals who have impacts to their credit. It really helps them to secure a car loan at a reasonable rate. That rate gets reduced by 50% after, I think, a year of on-time payments. The piece of it
Welcome back, everyone. I hope there was good, rich discussion. In each of the breakout sessions, there seemed to be a lot of good traction around what were some of the challenges in transportation. And then other folks and other groups, as I was jumping around, it appeared to be that folks are really diving into the solutions. So I wanted to touch base with some of the facilitators in each of those groups to give us maybe the top one or two highlights, thoughts, ideas that were in those spaces. So if I can toss it to Sarah to go first.
Sure. We had a great discussion, nice innovation program in Stamford that I will be handing over to Tristan to learn more about. I think the three words that came up were time, coordination, and location. So the kind of wanting the family or individual to be able to manage and govern their time rather than being governed by public transportation schedules when they're available. The kind of other top line, which is important to our study, I think, is, for reentry folks and for many, you have to get a job close to where you live, which limits your job options because you can't go very much further. Or it's too hard. There are too many, Veronica, you mentioned too many buses, too hard to get 15 miles from one community to another can take 2 hours. So time, coordination, and location would be my report out. Team, anything you'd add to that?
Amy, Shanae.
That was great, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Amy, or maybe we'll go Amy first.
I don't want to be too repetitive, but to Sarah's point, I think like timeliness, so hours of schedule. If, first of all, are the buses not necessarily being on time, but then also not running during flexible hours during which folks may be working in retail or other things early in the morning or late in the evening. And then we had sort of different representations of North Central, Northeastern. There are not public transportation options. It doesn't exist. Sometimes dial a ride doesn't exist. Representative Nuccio had a good point in that going after microtransit, or at least one program required having a transit authority. And for small towns, small towns are not going to have a transit authority. So those dollars end up going to bigger towns that already have transit solutions. So maybe getting creative about how we think about microtransit and being managed by a transit authority. But I think that's probably a good summation right now. And also going with children, Stefan made a good point about buses being overcrowded, being unclean, and sometimes the attitude of drivers, if they've been on long shifts and dealing with other sort of challenging customers, that's, not always pleasant to ride with kids.
Thank you, Amy, for that report out. That was great. Shanae?
Yes, I think we all had some similarities. I will add something else that was different. Ours was timeliness, accessibility, and safety. It was actually Anthony that mentioned about safety concerns. He's hearing in the Hartford area mainly that people are saying that there's some safety issues on the buses. So some people are often opting into Ubering. And as far as like a solution, we didn't really come up with a solution. The first thing I thought about maybe was like camera systems on buses to maybe mitigate that. And that's me being originally from New York, and I'm so used to something like that. But that was part of it. And then Christina mentioned the Stand Forward, I believe it's called, program, which is a free transit system. And my thoughts were maybe making it free for students. Maybe that
Thank
would be
you.
a solution.
Thank you, Shanae. And then lastly, Grace.
Our group focused, we were more focused on the solutions part of the questions. Our group, if I, like Sarah, kind of boil it down to words, I think we were thinking about flexibility and wraparound services. So Mike Bartley talked about the JAFIS program and how the clients there could benefit from cars, and specifically car repairs, which can be relatively cheap, enable flexibility, help the greatest number of people, and talked about his experience providing Ubers to JAFIS clients and how expensive that can actually turn out to be. Janine was also part of our group, and she talked about the Nutmeg Working Wheels program, which is a car buying program for people with financial issues that provides car loans at a reasonable rate, but also really pointed out the importance of having funds for things that come along with car ownership, so maintenance, and then had a great suggestion about making sure that we include financial literacy and other wraparound supports as part of any solution that we provide. So that was really great to hear as well.
Wonderful. That just is going to make our meeting at 12 o'clock when we meet with the team today on the transportation feasibility study. I want to thank everyone for engaging in such a rich discussion. This is so important for our state, especially when we want to make sure that our families are thriving and that our workforce is also thriving. So thank you so much for contributing to our breakout session. We're going to go ahead and move on to the CLIF tools. I'm going to do a quick run through because I know many of you know what the CLIF tools are. And so but for those who are new to the work group and to the 2Gen initiative, the CLIF tools are a set of tools offered to us for free from the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank. And the CLIF tools is a career ladder identifier and financial forecaster. And basically there are 3 sets of dashboards in this tool. There's a snapshot, which provides an immediate path to financial stability. So it provides and identifies immediate pathways for families. And so the worker works with the client, uses this tool to find an immediate response to some financial stability. They would go through this dashboard and run through it with the client quickly. And then there is the dashboard, which explores the potential financial returns of different careers. So looking at if I am currently a CNA and I want to go to be an LPN, this is what it would take me to get there, how much money I would make, and how long it would take me to get there. And so this is a really good tool to kind of budget and future forecast. And then the last one is the planner. So it creates a detailed budget in support of a career move. And so just shifting that, there's some reports on what it would look like. And it's a really, really great tool. We have some great results that are happening in the state, but we want to really increase our opportunities with different agencies across the state. And so we're looking for this work group to either spread the word, be a part of this movement, use this tool, have it as another resource in your tool bank for your agencies. Right now, we have trained 12 agencies, and some agencies have like these subdivisions within them. So we were tossing around the reality of how many agencies have been trained. But when we're looking at the big umbrella organizations, there's been about 12. 17 leaders have had separate training from their employees around the CLIF tools, and those leaders have made the decision to move forward to implement in their agencies. And we've trained about 140 individuals, employees. Our goal is to reach 40 agencies by June 30th, 2025. That is a lofty goal, but I feel like we can get there with all of your help. So if you are an agency that is interested in participating or having this CLIP tool or learning more about it, feel free to pull out your cell phones. I know in school they say not to pull them out, but I'm asking you to pull your cell phones out and scan this QR code using your camera. You can fill in, it's like about 3 or 4 questions, just your name, organization, and just a couple other demographic info so that we can get to your agency and get you all informed about how the benefits of the CLIF tools. And so I'll leave that up just for a few seconds. And then there is an opportunity for us to do this pretty soon. Again, we're trying to get all of these trainings done by June 30th, and then hoping that folks are using this. I know that the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank is also touching base with organizations on how effective the tool is being used across their agencies. And before we get to the benefit cliffs pilot, I do want to share this really amazing video. Here we are.
Christina, while you're doing that, can I jump in one kind of thing?
Absolutely.
So for those of you who are already using the tools, there's some work kind of in the broader national landscape to think about a toolkit about coaching specifically around the benefit cliff tools, and Connecticut will be engaged in kind of figuring out the set of tools that are needed. So stay tuned for that, but that's just emerging. We have a couple of folks who want to invest in it because we recognize the challenges around getting through the cliffs. And so just wanted to kind of throw that out.
Thank you, Sarah. So here you will see our public service announcement on the 2Gen initiative, and you'll get a little walkthrough of the benefit cliffs, what that is, cliff tools. You'll see a little American Job Center action, and then maybe you'll recognize a few folks in here.
The Connecticut Two-Generational Initiative, or 2Gen, is a whole family approach to helping parents reach economic stability. Parents and caregivers engaged in 2Gen are offered training, mentorship, and opportunities to collaborate and advocate to make systematic changes that help Connecticut families succeed in different areas of their lives. James, a single dad in Connecticut, will show us what many families are going through in our state and how he gets involved with 2Gen to help change policies and systems to support families.
I feel like I just paid these bills. I can't afford to pay these again right now. I need a better paying job, but who has time for training or school when you're raising a kid? If this bus doesn't come soon, I'll be late for work again. I need to be there in 30 minutes, but Ava's daycare is 30 minutes away, and then it's another 15 minutes to get to work.
Sorry, James, but I need someone who can be on time. I know you have a family to support. Here's some info on the local job center.
Hi, James. I understand you're looking for a job that fits your family's needs.
Yeah, it's been hard to find something that pays well and gives me the flexibility to take care of my daughter.
I hear you. Let's see how we can help. I'm going to use something called Cliff Tools to help you compare different job opportunities and see how they'll affect your benefits and overall income. We can use this information to find a few job options that fit your schedule and won't reduce your benefits. Plus, I know a few organizations in Connecticut.
Oh no.
Try turning off your video for your camera, and it might give more load. It might help load the video.
Try starting it again, meaning just hit play.
Yeah.
Find a few job options that fit your schedule and won't reduce your benefits. Plus, I know a few organizations in Connecticut.
Yeah.
I may have the, let me try to find the version on my computer that is.
I promise you, I played this beforehand and it worked perfectly fine.
YouTube sometimes betrays you. Or not YouTube, these video, hosting websites.
Training so you can keep growing in your career.
That's amazing. How do you learn how to do that?
The Connecticut 2Gen Initiative trains career counselors all over Connecticut on how to use the Cliff Tools. If you're looking to increase opportunities for Connecticut families, I also heard 2Gen is looking for parents like you to join their 2Gen Parent Engagement Workgroup. The Parent Engagement Workgroup is part of the 2Gen Advisory Board. The Advisory Board is made up of 25% parents and 75% other partners like state agencies, businesses, and other organizations. Parents and caregivers in the Parent Engagement Workgroup get mentorship and training on state government, the legislative process, the 2Gen Initiative, and other topics to help prepare them to use their voice to advocate for change. Parent Engagement Workgroup members may be invited to join the 2Gen Advisory Board. On the Advisory Board, parents, state agencies, and funders collaborate as equal members to strengthen systems and policies that impact jobs, transportation, housing, childcare, and benefits cliffs to help families succeed in different areas of their lives. Parents are compensated for their participation in meetings, training, peer mentorship, advocacy, and community outreach. 2Gen's parent engagement model has influenced other state agencies to adopt similar models, such as the Office of Early Childhood's Parent Cabinet and the Baby Bonds Advisory Council.
As a parent consultant, we do research, we collect data, we host events, and we work with the stakeholders around Connecticut to collect information from the community so that they can do the work behind the scenes.
2Gen means to me, me being a voice for myself, being able to advocate for myself, for my family, and for other parents in my community, and able to make a difference.
You have to use your voice to be able to tell everyone this is what's needed. It's helped me with being able to sit on so many different boards and commissions, and it's even gotten me elected. So I think parents definitely get involved in their community. You are the voice for your community. And sometimes we may not want to be the voice, but how can you affect change if you don't begin to use your voice and advocate for different policies?
Let's create a brighter future for Connecticut families and center parent voices in policy and practice. Visit our website to learn more and get involved.
All right, Sarah, I hope you all enjoyed that and saw a couple of familiar faces there. I'm going to toss it over to you. I know we are tight on time.
All right. So, Christina, you're going to run the slides, yeah?
Yes, ma'am.
All righty. So, I'm going to give a brief overview of the pilot work, and really looking forward to kind of hearing a little bit from this group about your thoughts on kind of where we're headed with this. So I'm going to walk really quickly through the top part. As most of you know, we've made a bunch of policy changes to mitigate the cliffs. You can see them here: TANF income disregards, implementing covered CT, increasing the state EITC, one of the highest state EITCs in the nation, and more. We're now kind of seeking to understand next policy options at state and federal level to more completely address cliffs. And in the spring of this year, there was an act passed that mandated us to explore a benefit cliff pilot. So that is what we have been doing. Next slide, please. Partners, both mandated and also inclusive in the based on the legislation. We have the 2Gen Advisory Board parent leaders, the Department of Social Services, OWS, the Office of Workforce Strategy, Office of Early Childhood, Department of Housing, and JFIS, part of the TANF work. We contracted with Social Finance, a national intermediary, to do a feasibility study for a benefit cliff pilot to really understand how to mitigate the cliffs so that families have greater economic mobility. Next slide. The pilot approach that we are considering will work with 200 families who would commit to taking 2 career steps over 3 years, right? So the idea is to really demonstrate if families are given the time and the resource, they can move ahead in the way that they want to for their families. But they need that kind of time and the resource to do so. So the thinking is the initial steps to an entry-level job, or maybe slightly above, kind of in the $18 to $22 an hour range. And the second step would probably require degree or certification. And the hope is that, and the plan is for families to be able to move above all benefit levels. We'll be providing coaching, financial capability training, and some other supports. And importantly, we want to engage a third-party evaluator to assess the impact, because again, the whole point of the pilot is to inform future policy work and to really understand how can we really open economic mobility for families. Next slide. There are 3 options that Social Finance explored, and I think Ryan is on the call from Social Finance. He's done a great job. So the first scenario, 1A and 1B, are kind of variations on a theme, is that they would receive, based on what their benefit mix is, up to $10,000 a year to cover the loss of benefits that are caused by an increase in income. And so I'll show it to you in a minute, but if I've lost 5,000 benefits, that would get replaced. The second scenario is you would receive up to the same amount to cover the net loss. So it would make you whole again. The first one would give you some additional resource. The second one would bring you up to where you were. And the third one is saying that what we would do is assure a stable level of resources over the term of the pilot. So whatever benefits you walked into the pilot with, you would keep until the end of the pilot as a way to both ensure that you didn't have to worry about any loss of benefits and could really focus on your education and training, and also would allow for folks to begin to build a bit of a cushion. Next slide, please. So this is scenario 1A, kind of as an exemplar. And you can see right in the before, it's, having $34,000 in income and $10,000 in mix of benefits. But what happens after you get a raise, in this case, somebody's working and then gets a raise, your net raise is actually much smaller because of taxes, and also your net raise, if you include benefits, is much smaller. So participants would receive all the money back, $7,059, knowing that taxes would reduce some. Parents pointed that out very helpfully, and also that you've lost some of your benefits. So you end up with, if you look at this from the left to the right, the person, this family ends up with a little bit more than they would have had at the before scenario. So they get that raise. Next up, that's scenario 1A. Scenario 1B really brings you to the same level, very close to the same level that you were at, because again, it's replacing net resources. It's not gross, but it's net resources. So in this scenario, you do just about the same as before if you get that raise. Next slide. And the last scenario is scenario 2, which we're calling stable benefits pilot. And I'll say, you'll see this in a future slide, but this is the option that both parents who have reviewed this, the parent leaders in 2Gen, and social finance are recommending, because we think it will teach us the most about, they think it will teach us the most about what we need to do to change policy. So in this case, as I said before, whoops, go back, whoop. Parents would and families would receive the same amount of benefits over the life of the pilot that they had starting. And then as their income increased, they would be able to both keep some additional benefit, create an asset cushion, and then really go ahead and get their education and training so that they can move ahead. So think about some of the typical jumps of like a CNA to a LPN, right? Or a machinist to a higher level of work in advanced manufacturing. So folks need the time and the resource to be able to get there. And we believe that with that, people would really be able to move ahead. And not unimportantly, that this would create some return to state government in terms of people now being paying taxes and also in the no longer receiving benefits. So the initial investment we think is going to pay off in the long run. It is difficult to do a return on an investment up front, but we will certainly be looking at that on the back end. Next slide. I'm not going to go through all of this, but just so that you can see the indicators that we've thought about, right? We're looking at financial stability. We were looking at career pathway support, really how we identify policy changes and any operational challenges. So we kind of did a little bit of social finance did a little bit of an evaluation of this. So again, landing on scenario 2, the stable benefit provides the most net resources. We also think it will create the best circumstances for family stability. And that really we can move folks can really move forward to career advancement. Per the video you just saw, benefits don't become a factor in decision making. And we'll really begin to understand how we support folks in moving into kind of an economically stable situation that also it benefits employers with folks filling higher skilled demand jobs. It supports families in moving ahead, and it supports government with a reduction over time in use of benefits and an increase in the tax base. So and then operational challenges. one of the things that we're unclear about as we've reviewed this with social finance is kind of how the federal government will see if we have overages, for instance, in a SNAP benefit because people increase their income but still get the benefit. We're not sure about how we'll work with the federal government on payments for that. We'll see how that works. Next slide. So as I said, social finance has recommended scenario 2 as the option that would support Connecticut, and the 2 Gen parent leaders recommend same. And actually, when we met with them to present this report, they noted it's been their idea of a way forward for several years now. So they are the original thinkers here. Next slide. So we're not going to break into small groups. Would love any feedback you have, in particular on scenario 2, and any questions or concerns you have. And Christina, we don't have enough time to go into groups, so we're just going to kind of have a big group discussion. You can take the slide down so we can see folks. Thoughts, comments, questions? I know it was very fast. But so just to kind of say again, I know Veronica's laughing, just to say again, right, that the thinking here is really providing a stable set of income and benefit that can support families as they really move forward in their careers, recognizing that if you need time to be able to move ahead and not to have to kind of scramble the whole time as you're trying to move ahead. So comments, questions, thoughts on that scenario 2? And Ryan, I think I did my best to not completely kill your report.
No, you did a fine job, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Hey, Sarah. So good to see you and everybody. So great to see the work that's being done in these last couple of months. So I'm curious, has there been discussions with the federal partners, state partners, like, is there an implementation plan in place to keeping those benefits steady despite just kind of like what you mentioned at the end there, like if you're SNAP, you're no longer eligible for SNAP because your income is too high?
Yep. So the hi Manisha, it's good to see you. 2 kind of thoughts. At the state level, the team has thought a lot about where the eligibility thresholds come in, given that the state has been working on increasing economic mobility. We actually think there's some cliffs that we have to navigate. The biggest concern in some ways is Medicaid, but because of covered CT, we think we've got, and because for the CHIP side, it's a fairly high threshold. We think we think we're going to be okay there. We have had discussion with the federal partners, and the kind of sticky wickets, as always, are Medicaid and SNAP. So I just kind of addressed where we think Medicaid will be, recognizing we're talking with current federal partners who may change in January. So we have to kind of look at that. And the other is SNAP, and trying to kind of, and I noted that with SNAP, that's the one place we think we may have to repay any overage. But we're feeling pretty good about the rest of it. I think with the incoming federal administration, I'm hearing some noise about being interested in lots of flexibilities. So this may fit very well, but wait and see. We don't have an implementation plan yet. This is just the pilot concept to understand kind of cost feasibility. And the primary costs really for this pilot, besides the ongoing benefits that people would have had anyway, because they wouldn't have been in the pilot, are the kind of coaching and administrative costs, and possibly that repay to the federal government. So that's kind of the overall structure. I don't know, Manisha, if that's helpful.
No, that is, I guess 2 thoughts. Maybe some commitments from employers on the back end that, to help them have that 2-step progression. So that might help to make sure at least they can, keep moving on that side. And then, do you remember, I think it was, I forget the name of the program, FFS or something, like, I think it's in housing where, like, if their benefits go, if you're going to lose benefits, maybe the money could go into an account. So if there's, like, if you can't kind of work through all the issues, of keeping the resources the same, maybe the funding could go into an account that they can then access after the pilot is over. So maybe there's other ways to keep it going.
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned that, because we've talked a little bit about it at the Family Self-Sufficiency Program that is part of Section 8 vouchers. One thing we aren't fully addressing with the pilot is housing, because it is a federal 30% up the way. But I think we're thinking a little bit about your thought, which is, could we help people escrow and save so that they are because part of what happens, as everybody knows, there's a report that's just out, 40% of Connecticut residents don't feel financially stable, and that includes not being able to weather an emergency. And if you're not able to weather an emergency, you've got to have a cushion, or else you're going to fall out of employment the moment you have an emergency. So thank you for that comment. Other comments?
There were just some in the chat that said something. Meryl was like, SNAP is also under threat in the new federal budget. And then Shanae was asking about the self-sufficiency and the funds that Manisha mentioned, if that is like an escrow.
Yeah. Right, Meryl, it's so hard to know right now what's under threat and what's not. I think yes. It's very hard to know. We know block granting is something that's the new administration is very interested in. Whether or not they'll block grant SNAP, I don't know. Medicaid, I've certainly heard some tell on. So I think we partly have to wait and see. And in some ways, a block grant would actually, I'm not sure it would make it easier for the state, but make it easier for the pilot. And Shanae, yes, like an escrow, or like something to just kind of put to the side so that when you leave the pilot, you have a cushion upon which to rest.
And Meryl also stated earlier in the chat that there is some major cuts to Medicaid coming down from the federal government, that there's a webinar Tuesday, December 10th. He put the link in the chat. I will get that to everyone when I send a follow-up email with the Zoom.
Oh, yeah. See?
So yeah,
Meryl, now I see it. You've got block grant in there. Yeah. So one of the big questions, and thank you for Meryl putting I see the registration link at the bottom here. One of the things that is likely to happen, which will affect Connecticut and benefit Cliffs too, is that the incentive for expanding Medicaid to states may go away. And right now, that expansion exists in Connecticut and is 90% paid for by the federal government. So if it goes away, it's going to be some hard choices by the state government or by Connecticut state government about whether to keep the expansion and how to pay for it, or to cut folks off of Medicaid. So thank you, Meryl, for that information. And folks can look in the chat and see the Zoom. It's the Georgetown economic folks, right, Meryl? I forget their full title.
Yeah, I'll get it out to everyone in a follow-up email after this, once the recording downloads, and I'll get everyone all the resources that are listed in this chat.
So in some ways, right, thank you, Christina, for pointing those out. This moment in time may be even more important to demonstrate what families need in economic mobility, because we are all dedicated to making sure that families have every opportunity, right, to be able to move ahead. And we may need to shape the pilot in different ways, but we will see as the new kind of administration comes in. It's ever more important to show that families, when offered the opportunity, move to the very optimal place they can be because they want to. And it's important to, I think, for us all to kind of keep focused there. Are there other questions?
There was nothing else in the chat.
Yeah. So questions or comments from anybody else on the call?
I think people are just processing all this wonderful, rich information. And I think
Charles, were you going to jump in because you came on screen, or you just, yep, this was good information? Yep, it was good information. Okay.
And I'm so happy to see DOC here. I think it's so important to make that connection, especially when folks are coming from out of corrections and trying to transition into normal life, like all of these opportunities that the 2Gen Initiative and our partner agencies are putting together to make sure people are successful when they're coming home. So we're so thankful for DOC to be present. I also wanted to say thank you to Grace and the Office of Workforce Strategies for your partnership and for the presentation today. It was really robust and thoughtful. And I know that the breakout sessions were really wonderful as I was skipping around getting into each of them. To our co-chairs, Amy and Shanae, thank you for helping with the planning of this meeting and getting everything together and just being so flexible with all things great. And Sarah, for your presentation as well on the benefit cliffs and social finance and RSG for all the wonderful work that you all are doing. And so I am going to just post up one more item before we depart, which I will also have in our follow-up email. If you have your cell phone, feel free to pull that out, pull the camera out, scan this QR code. We're interested in learning whether this meeting was successful, what could be better, what would you like to have gotten from it, what might be some things that you are all doing that we should be aware of to inform our future work. And how do you want to participate differently or the same? And so we would be very thankful for your feedback. I don't know if Amy or Shanae want to say anything else before we close out.
I was actually just going to thank everyone for coming. We had some seasoned people here. We had some people in my group that actually this was their first work group meeting. So thank you for joining us. And yes, please give us your feedback on today's meeting. How can we improve in any other way and any other feedback you have? Thank you so much.
Amy?
Yeah, same. Thanks, everyone. Great to be back in this space and to really hear about progress. The transportation discussion in particular was exciting to hear. I think there's so much space for growth there. So continue to be excited about this work. Thank you, Christina, for kind of pushing it and rolling it along, and Sarah, while the working group was a little bit quiet over the summer. So look forward to being re-engaged.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I hope that you all have a wonderful day. Expect a follow-up email with some dates for future work group meetings. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
I'm trying to leave and my thing's not working.
Well, that's okay. You can stay with me.
I'm
Say hi
like
to
so slow with my right hand.
Oh, no.
Bye.
Okay, bye.